Nigerianpolitics. The summary of the 2026-2028 medium-term framework, expenditure framework, MTEF and physical strategy paper. You recall on the 11th of December, the Senate received the request of Mr. President and Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of the Federation on the 2026 to 2027 medium-term expenditure framework and physical strategy paper, and referred same to the Senate Committee on Finance. We did all that we need to do by calling all the agencies, the economic team, and we had an interactive session. And based on the projections and the predicated assumptions that were submitted, we looked at all, such as the daily crude oil production, which is about 1.8 million barrels per day, the oil price benchmark, which was about 64.85 per barrel, the exchange rate of 1,512 naira per $1 US, the GDP growth rate at 4.68%, inflation rate at 16.5%, federal government of Nigeria retained revenue at 34.33 trillion naira, proposed federal government expenditure at 54.46 trillion naira, fiscal deficit at 20.12 trillion naira, new borrowings, including local and foreign, at 17.886 trillion naira. Personnel costs for MDAs at 8.364 trillion naira. Pensions, gratuities, and retirees' benefits at 1.38 trillion. Capital expenditure, exclusive of transfers, at 20.131 trillion naira. Statutory transfers at 3.15 trillion naira, debt service at 15.91 trillion naira, sinking fund at 388.54 billion naira, total recurrent non-debt at 15.265 trillion naira, special intervention recurrent at 200 billion naira, and special intervention capital at 14 billion naira. All these assumptions were considered, and we had the findings after scrutinizing the submissions. And following a thorough review of the submissions presented by the MDAs and GOEs, the committee noted the following. One, as our findings, the projected crude oil benchmark prices are 64.85 US dollars, 64.30 US dollars, and 60.50 US dollars per barrel for 2026, 2027, and 2028 respectively. Nigeria's crude oil output performance based on OPEC's output target had been impressive within the period under review. For instance, Nigeria recorded one of the strongest month-on-month production gains among OPEC members in November 2025, according to the December 2025 OPEC monthly oil market reports. 3, the projected exchange rate stands at 1,512, 1,432.15, and 1,383.18 for 2026, 2027, and 2028 respectively. Number 4, inflation rates projections are 16.5%, 13%, and 9% for 2026, 2027, and 2028 respectively. The real GDP growth rate is projected at 4.68%, 5.96%, and 7.9% for year years 2026, 2027, and 2028 respectively. The prospect of growth in 2026 was assessed to be high in anticipation of the gains of reforms. The new tax regime will activate veritable economic reform and development. In line with the ongoing economic reforms and the activation of the Tax Act, it has been observed that the federal government implementation of a national scanning policy within the national single window of the Nigerian Revenue Service in collaboration with the relevant agencies will enhance revenue assurance, improve trade facilitation, reduce leakages, and strengthen transparency and national security. The criteria, number 8, the criteria in the overview of the framework for revenues and expenses, the 2026 federal government of Nigerian budget proposed spending stands at 54.46 trillion naira, of which 34.33 trillion is federal government retained revenue. New borrowings stood at 17.88 trillion, which constitutes both domestic and foreign borrowings. Debt service was valued at 15.52 trillion. Pensions, gratuities, and retirees benefits stood at 1.376 trillion, and fiscal deficit at 20.13 trillion. Number 9, capital expenditure is projected at 20.131 trillion, which is exclusive of transfers. Statutory transfers at 3.152 trillion. Sinking fund is projected at 388.54 billion. Number 10, total recurrent non-debt is projected at 15.265 trillion. Special intervention for recurrent and capital is pegged at 200 billion naira and 14 billion respectively. The recommendations, I go to the recommendations now. In the light of the above findings, the committee recommends that 1, the projected crude oil benchmark prices of 64.85, 64.30, and 65.50 US dollars per barrel for 2026, 2027, and 2028 respectively be reduced to $60 for 2026, $65 for 2027, and $70 for 2028. This is in recognition of the global geopolitical tensions in Europe and the Middle East and the sensitivity of global crude oil prices. 2, the projection for domestic crude oil production for 2026, 2027, and 2028 are 1.84 million barrels per day, 1.88 million barrels per day, and 1.92 million barrels per day, respectively, be sustained. Number 3, the projected exchange rate for 2026, 2027, and 2028 are 1,512, 1,432.15, and 1,383.18 respectively, should be sustained in line with the CBN's policy to stabilize the naira and promote effective fiscal and monetary policy coordination. Number 4, inflation rates projection for 2026, 2027, and 2028 are 16.5%, 13%, and 9% respectively, be sustained based on the commitment of the nation's monetary policy authority to moderate inflationary pressures. Number 5, the GDP growth rate projected at 4.68, 5.96, and 7.9 for year 2026, 2027, and 2028 respectively, amidst reform in the Nigerian economy and prospects for reforms to take effect in 2026. It's recommended that the projection of real GDP be sustained. The real GDP growth rate projected at 4.68%, 5.96%, and 7.9% for year 2026, 2027, and 2028, respectively, be sustained in anticipation of the gains of the tax reforms. Number 6, effective implementation of the new tax acts as veritable instruments for economic reforms for growth and development. Number 7, in line with the ongoing economic reforms and the activation of the Tax Act, it is recommended that the federal government implement a national scanning policy within the national single window of the Nigerian Revenue Service in collaboration with the relevant agencies. This will enhance revenue assurance, improve trade facilitation, reduce leakages, and strengthen transparency and national security. The framework for revenue and expenses, the 2026 federal government budget proposed spending, which stands at 54.46 trillion, of which 34.33 trillion is federal government retail revenue. New borrowing stood at 17.88 trillion, which constitute both domestic and foreign borrowings. Debt service was valued at 15.52 trillion. Pensions, gratuities, and retirees' benefits stood at 1.376 trillion, and fiscal deficit at 20.13 trillion be sustained. Number 9, the capital expenditure, exclusive of transfers, of 20.131 trillion, statutory transfers of 3.152 trillion, and sinking fund projected at 388.54 billion naira be sustained. 10, total recurrent, Number 10, total recurrent non-debt projected at 15.265 trillion, special intervention for recurrent and capital pegged at 200 billion and 14 billion respectively be sustained. If my distinguished colleagues, Mr. President, the description of this budget is carried in the report. The oil targets, the projections of revenues, the oil benchmarks, all are carried in this report. So, in conclusion, the committee expresses profound appreciation to the Senate, President, and the entire Senate, members of the Committee on Finance, for their commitment to duty in the discharge of this critical national assignment. It is our sincere hope that the approval of these recommendations will serve as a catalyst for sustainable economic prosperity in this country. I so submit.
Before the presentation of the budget to the National Assembly, and like it was done last year and in previous occasions, any law that is made by the National Assembly, once any flaw or anything is pointed out, or the premise upon which the law was made has changed, we have a right to bring it back here and rejig it. So whatever we are discussing here is not so much in finality, because if for any reason at all the circumstances change, this will still be represented to us and the House of Representatives for us to either amend, rejig, or add or subtract. So I believe that we should limit our comments, knowing very well that this is not a final situation, but this will enable us allow the budget to be laid between now and Thursday, when we are planning, between now and maybe 31st of December, even though we may decide to close to enable us to go for the Christmas. So I will say that we limit the debates on this. Senator Manguno.
Mr. Manguno, I represent Borno North Senatorial District. Mr. President, as you rightly pointed out, the MTEF is not sacrosanct. It is subject to review based on circumstances that may finally show itself. As it is now, Mr. President, distinguished senators, MTEF is not only the parameters on which the budget is based, but the philosophical cornerstone on which the aspiration of the budget is based on the figures presented by the chairman of the committee, these parameters or philosophical cornerstone are realistic and achievable. Like, for example, daily crude oil production of 1.84 million barrels per day, oil benchmark of $64.85 per barrel, exchange rate of 1,512 US naira per US dollar. So these figures are very, very realistic having regard to our present day economic circumstance. I therefore urge my colleagues to fast for second reading this MTEF and fiscal strategy paper with the spirit of light. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. My name is Adetokunbo Abiru, and I represent Lagos East. Let me start by thanking the chairman for a very comprehensive report that he has given, and of course, I also lend my support to it. Thereafter, I would also like to commend the federal government for the very cautious approach they have adopted in preparing the MTEF for 2026. And those commendations will come from specific areas based on prior performances of the budget. One, if you look at the revenue projection, you realize that there's emphasis is more on the non-oil revenue generation as opposed to oil. And this derives essentially from the shortfalls that we've had in prior oil revenue performance. So, for example, if you look at the MTEF critically, speaking to page 19 there, you realize that the oil revenue projections half year 2025 is under 40%. So placing reliance on non-oil makes a lot of sense, and I think it's very cautious, so I support it very wholeheartedly. Equally is that even in 2026, the projection in terms of revenue has been very moderately estimated. If you recall, in 2025, we had almost 41 trillion as projection for 2025. But based on the performance and what they have also experienced, what we are seeing in 2026 is 34 trillion, which is equally very cautious. Now, other indices, just like the chairman had said, in the area of inflation, will look very reasonable at 16.5. If you check MBS today, inflation has kind of reduced to 14.5. So that projection will also look very okay. Ditto the exchange rate as well, that has been put as an average of 1,500. So we commend all of those indices. Now, moving very quickly to expenditure estimation, we also notice another moderation there because 2026 expenditure is almost the same with what was estimated for 2025. And just arising from the closed session that we had, we have also seen a clear path to also correct all of the rollover cycle, the outstanding cycles of budget 2024 and 2025. So there's a clear path as to how that cycle is going to be closed and cleared going forward. So we commend all of that, all of those indices. And so in closing, let me just say that some of the areas of concern, I think the chairman has also mentioned those areas, which one will relate to the benchmark oil price, which of course from the MTEF, I think it came at about $65. And of course, from the chairman's presentation, I also support the moderation to $60 so that we don't overestimate. The only other area that I would just think that we should be very cautious about is in the area of the daily production as well, because up until now, I think our average production is still about 1.6, and of course, all of the investment that you require to improve production, we should be mindful of it that it will take some time before they really germinate. So I will want to suggest that we also kind of moderate oil production to 1.6. So based on all of the comments that I've made, I fully support the presentation, and I think that the budget, the MTEF remains a cautious assumption, which I totally support. Thank you, Mr. President, and my distinguished colleagues.
Mr. President, in line with previous speakers, I want to support this MTEF to go for second reading, particularly when we look at the indices. And I want to talk on one indices, Mr. President. Before now, the exchange rate is usually put at a lower rate, and later adjustment is usually made to adjust the budget. But when you look at this exchange rate, Mr. President, it is far above the current exchange rate, which make it very, very feasible that you cannot even adjust. And this budget shows that the MTEF that is being prepared shows the indication that we are approaching a realistic budget in this country, because the exchange rate cannot be moved again or cannot be adjusted to change the budget indices, because it is put at a higher rate. And with this, I wish them my support for this MTEF to be read the second time and pass. Thank you.
Distinguished colleagues, I rise to second the move that has been made by the chairman of the Finance Committee on the M12. Mr. Chairman, based on the sentiments already expressed by the adoption of this paper, of course, with the understanding that because it's not a document cast in iron, that as we move on and the budget is presented, adjustment can be made appropriately. And I do hope, Mr. Chairman, that when, Mr. President, when that happens, we will have the courage to do necessary adjustments because of the experience that we have had so far, hopefully learning from that experience, that will make necessary amendments to make sure that the budget becomes implementable. Thank you, Mr. President.
Well, Senator Olamileko.
Explanations that have been made, and take into account the comments Your Excellency has made with regard to the fact that, however we look at it, these are assumptions. Assumptions might be optimistic, they might be otherwise. They remain what they are, assumptions. And at the appropriate time, we see the movement of the market with regards to oil production, etc. And even those who have doubt about whether we can make 1.8 million a day, we had 2 million before, 2.1 million. So it's not something that is not achievable. I think that having regard to everything, including your helpful reminder to us that these are just assumptions, I like to move with your permission that we adopt the report as presented by the chairman of distinguished Senator Sani on the MTEF. I so move, Mr. President, if I have your permission so to do.
Senator, aye. Those against say nay. The ayes have it. Recommendation 1. Those in support of recommendation 1 as presented say aye. Those against say nay. The ayes have it. Recommendation 2. Those in support of recommendation 2 as presented say aye. Those against say nay. The ayes have it. Recommendation 3. Those in support of recommendation 3 say aye. Those against say nay. The ayes have it. Recommendation 4. Those in support say aye. Those against say nay. The ayes have it. Recommendation 5. Those in support of recommendation 5 as presented say aye. Those against say nay. The ayes have it. Recommendation 6. Those in support of recommendation 6 as stated herein say aye. Those against say nay. The ayes have it. Recommendation 7. Those in support of recommendation 7 as stated herein in this report say aye. Those against say nay. The ayes have it. Recommendation 8. Those in support of recommendation 8 are stated herein that the framework for revenues and expenses, the 2026 federal government of Nigeria budget proposed spending, which stands at 54.46 trillion, of which 34.33 trillion is federal government retained revenue. New borrowings standing at 17.8 trillion, which constitute both domestic and foreign borrowings. Debt service valued at 15.5 trillion. Pensions, gratuities, and retirees benefits standing at 1.33 trillion. And fiscal deficit standing at 20.1 trillion. That this be sustained. Those in support say aye. Those against say nay. The ayes have it. Recommendation 9, that the capital expenditure exclusive of transfers of 20.1 trillion, statutory transfers of 3.1 trillion, and sinking fund projected at 388.5 billion be sustained. Say aye. Those against say nay. The ayes have it. Recommendation 10, that total recurrent non-debt projects projected at 15.2 trillion, special intervention for recurrent and capital pegged at 200 billion, and 14 billion respectively be sustained within this report. Those in support say aye, and those against say nay. The ayes have it. Let me thank the Committee on Finance and all the members for working together. Committee on Finance, Committee on Banking, Committee on Preparation, and distinguished senators all working together, including national planning, to bring up this the report on the 2026-2028 medium-term expenditure framework, MTEF, and fiscal strategy paper, FSP, for the period of 2026 to 2028. And I also want to thank distinguished senators for taking cognizance of the fact that this is not cast in concrete, it's not cast in stone, and that the possibility of review exists when the budget is finally presented before us. I think this has been a very patriotic move in order to allow for immediate free flow of the budget proposals for 2026 to be presented to us by Mr. President. I thank you all, and I hope that these projections may be realistic, should be realistic, will be realistic, shall be realistic, for the purpose of ensuring that the renewed hope agenda of Mr. President and the economic indices projected become a reality. I thank you all. Accordingly, this the Senate is hereby adjourned to 17th day of December 2026 at 11 a.m. prompt. Okay. Let me take that again for correctiveness. This Senate stands adjourned to the 17th day of December 2025 at 11 a.m. prompt. So anybody who wants to talk about 2026 or 2027, that person is not here.